Very good. So I would like to welcome you to the session on, and this is the beginning of a literacy series that we host at the University of Tennessee. My name is Zoi Traga-Philippakos, and I'm originally from Greece, and from a part of Greece that's called Sparta. I'm from Sparta, Greece. As I jokingly say often, I am from the land of the 300. However, for the past 2 years, I've been, my home is the University of Tennessee and Knoxville, Tennessee. And I work in the Department of Theory Practice in Teacher Education, and I will be very happy to share the PowerPoint at the end so you can follow the link and you will have a chance to see all our programs. So we are launching today our literacy series. This is a series that will take place from January until June. And we have a topic that addresses reading every month. So the first month in January, we begin with Phonological Awareness, Phonics. The second month will continue with another area, one of the big ideas of reading, but we will also plan to address writing as well as writing assessment, reading and writing connections, and literature. So this session today specifically focuses on assessment purposes. And before I begin, I would like to share what the goal of the session today is. So my goal is to review what assessment-based instruction is and explain what assessment-based decision-making is. So before I begin, because I would like the most for you to take the most out of this session, I want you to record how you understand assessment-based instruction. I will not ask you, however, I would like for you to just record your understanding of this term. So I would like to comment briefly on the reasons that we are talking now on assessment and on response to intervention and multi-tiers systems of support. Initially, there was what we call the discrepancy model that was primarily in use. In the discrepancy model, and there has been criticism on this, that's why there was a change, which we welcomed with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act in 2004. Until that point, with a discrepancy model, the approach to differentiation was based on a way to fail approach. In other words, a student would fail academically before they will receive any type of support. Also, this discrepancy model may really reflect a weak instruction or poor teaching, as Kuken and Powitz had commented on. In other words, it's not that the students do not respond to instruction because of difficulty in understanding the concepts, but simply because the instruction is not as strong and as systematic to address their needs. Also, this discrepancy model may ignore those students who always perform a little lower than the cutoff point to receive support. So these consistently low performers who fly under the radar, as we usually say, they are the ones who may be ignored or neglected until the point that they are at risk. So the response to intervention within its initial form, worked for the early identification of those students who were considered to be at risk. So the goal was early identification and prevention. It's a goal to prevent really someone from reaching the point of being at risk of developing reading deficits. There is a systematic approach on not only providing instruction that address students' needs, but providing progress monitoring to those students, so that the goal is to examine the student's response to that intervention. So response to instruction, I would say. So if the student does not respond, they should be monitoring across time to identify what other intervention, what other support can be in place to support the student's needs. And all students receive high quality research-based instruction. And we will say that we're moving to evidence-based instruction. So it is not instruction that's only for one small group of students who are in need, but is aggressive, systematic, evidence-based and research-based instruction for all students. So if you think of this as tiers, you have the first tier for every student is receiving high quality instruction. The second tier will receive differentiated instruction, probably with standardized methods. And the tier 3 instruction will be the small percent of students who are resisting instruction and who need additional support, probably with a different program, a different instructional methodology than the rest. So if you need additional information on this, you may visit the multi-tiered systems of support at mtssforsuccess.org, where not only information on the model, but also information on specific approaches can be found. So when I'm looking now into assessment, we're thinking, so if assessment is at the heart of instruction, what are the purposes of assessment? During this session, we're not going to discuss and we're not going to comment on formative measures, but just on the purposes of assessment. So in assessment, we may have screeners. This is the universal screening. You may have diagnostic, progress monitors, and outcomes. So when you're thinking of a screening measure, and the model includes a universal screening, a screening measure is time efficient, is for all students. It happens really fast. I want you to think of this, even though the medical model, I know it's not as popular in education. I want you to think of a screener as a thermometer. It will not tell me what causes fever on a learner, but it will tell me that the learner has fever. And when I say has fever, I mean that the learner does not perform according to the benchmark goals for their grade level. So they are not meeting grade level expectations, but we don't know why. So a screening measure is universal, is for everyone, can happen across the year. Usually it's beginning and middle of the year, and just tells me whether someone's performing as expected according to the grade level expectations. An example of that will be the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, what we call DIBELS assessment, or the Phonological Awareness literacy screening, the PALS measure. Now, once we identify that someone has fever, you follow with a diagnostic measure. Now you're trying to identify what exactly is it that causes a student not to perform according to grade level expectations. This measure takes longer, and this measure may follow more, this assessment purpose takes longer to be completed, but it may require more than one measure to be administered, not just one assessment. So examples of this type of diagnostic measures can be phonics inventory, spelling inventory, sight word list, etc. And I would like to show you some of those so that you'll have an idea of how this may function and why. So when I'm assessing decoding, there may be, and that's an example from the Informal Decoding Inventory by Walpole, McKenna, and Philippakos. This includes both single syllables and multisyllabic words and examines words that they are real words and pseudo words. So the students are assessed, and then there is an exact guide that tells you whether someone's performing as expected and has mastery, or the student is in need of systematic instruction. You may use any type of inventory, decoding inventory, for this purpose. Usually you'll notice in this type of inventories that you will see patterns that they are assessed both in real words and fake words, in pseudo words. So the patterns will address consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant, silent E. There will be vowel teams, there will be R control, there will be blends and digraphs. And the goal is to identify what exactly interferes, what is the roadblock for that learner. You may also have a phonics inventory. In the assessment for reading instruction by McKenna and Stahl, there is ready-made assessments, but one of them is the informal phonics inventory that assesses consonant sounds, digraphs, consonant blends, and the goal is to see whether a student knows them and has mastery on them, because if they are not aware of a blend, they will struggle to read the word that includes a blend. So as the student is reading, the teacher is recording, and this you can see can be across dates, so you can see how the student is performing across time. Another measure can be phonological awareness, where you will see, okay, someone is struggling with their decoding, but what can be, do they have phonological awareness skills? So you may conduct a series of assessments again on phonological awareness, examining phonemic awareness components too, besides rhyming. You may look at the deletion, phoneme addition, phoneme isolation. And when I speak about phoneme deletion, an example will be the word is skit. What word? Skit. What word will I have if I take away the s sound? And the answer from the child will be, from the learner, will be kit. Or a phoneme addition will be if I say the word is at. What word will I have if I add the sound? And the learner will respond mat. And that can be with longer words, not just with smaller words. But the goal is to see whether they can manipulate sounds in spoken words. And they have registered this phonological awareness skill. Another measure is the elementary spelling inventory. We know that there is a consistency in a way between reading and writing, even though colleagues will say that spelling is at the back of the development, meaning that you may be able to read a word, but doesn't mean that you necessarily know how to spell that word. We see this often with children who will misspell read, for instance, with R-E-A-D versus R-E-E-D. The reason they don't really know the spelling is because they have not perhaps seen the word many times in context to know that the read has to do with decoding of words, whereas the reed is what grows next to rivers. So in a spelling inventory, the teacher will analyze the students' responses, written responses, after she has read the word and has used the word into context, into a sentence. So the student will provide spelling. This is a sample of misspellings for bed, ship, when, lump, float, rain, plus for place, and die for drive. And then the teacher will record the components that the student has correctly addressed. And finally, we'll determine what is the area that the student has less than 5, has missed more than 2. And that will be the beginning point potentially. But it's very likely that if someone struggles in a specific area in reading, you will see that similar struggle in their spelling. Another measure will be the high frequency words, where, and this is based on the Fry list, but there is the Dolch list, there are several others. So the student is reading, the teacher is recording the student's performance to see whether it is high frequency, lack of high frequency words knowledge. And when I say high frequency words, they are all the words in a way at the end will be part of the sight word vocabulary of students, because the more times they see a word, the better they will remember it. We say that there are different levels of knowing a word, but you will know a word between 7 to 14 exposures. So that's different colleagues will share a different number, but you need multiple exposures to a word. There are some words now that they don't follow any phonemic, any pattern of decoding. So these words will be irregular. The most irregular word I would say in the English language will be the word of, where you see an O and it's pronounced and you see an F and it's pronounced V. So the word of will be an irregular word. That's a word that the students will need to learn, and can interfere really with the way that they are trying to read when they try to decode it, and they will read it as off. Another measure will be the letter names and sounds. In this case, you're pointing to the letter, you're asking the child what letter, and then what sound, what letter, what sound. And this same tactic is followed both for upper cases and lower cases. You'll notice that there is the closed A and closed G, which is likely that the students will be learning to write and may not recognize this A and this G. And that again is in the resource I mentioned by McKenna and Stoll. You may also assess students on writing. In this case, I have an example of student writing in story. and students writing in procedural. I say this because in this case, I have for the same child, there is a measure, a different genre assessed, not just one type of writing. You may use a CBM and ask the child to write a sentence within a specific amount of time, but it's a wise decision when you're looking at diagnostic, what interferes, to look at the synchrony or consistency on errors that a child produces across measures. So if I'm looking at spelling and writing and decoding, and it's very likely that I will see consistency in the errors that will help me identify what is my starting point in instruction. Now, once we determine what the issue is in instruction, we follow with progress monitor. This progress monitoring needs to be systematic, meaning that it has to be a specific time frame that you as an instructor decide that this is the time that I'm going to examine whether the student responds to instruction. It has to be connected with the instruction, and it needs to lead to instructional adjustments, meaning that if a student does not respond to a progress monitor, we cannot continue providing the same type of support. There has to be some change in the instruction. And finally, the final purpose of assessment is an outcome measures. Outcome measures usually are done at the end of the year. They don't really lead to any type of adjustments in instruction, and outcomes measures really will tell us if the program we use, the curriculum we have, the literacy approaches we use are effective for our learners. So this is what will tell us if what we have been applying in the school system really leads to results or not. Outcome measures usually are performed at the very end of the academic year. So now that we looked at the assessment-based instruction and we understand how this can function, what is assessment-based decision-making? So there are different models that you can think of this. I'm going to be showing you the cognitive model, and I will be explaining how this can be applied within the context of an early learner, but it can be for all grades. So when you're thinking of a model of reading, I want you to be thinking of this as a system of questions. This is a system of questions that you consistently ask with a purpose to identify what is the instructional need of the learner. This is like a roadmap that will help a teacher and an educator to decide how to proceed in determining what interferes with a learner's growth. The questions that you ask, they are in 3 areas: in word recognition, oral language comprehension, and strategic knowledge. So the cognitive model, and it's a cognitive model of assessment in this case, because if you reverse the arrows, and that's how it initially was presented, all these components, they merge to support reading comprehension. Because we need to say this, that the ultimate goal of instruction is not for the students to be fast decoders. It's not for the students to say very fast the sounds when they're asked to segment them, but the goal is for them to learn those skills, master those, in order to have enough cognitive energy to devote to reading comprehension. So these 3 areas that they merge to support reading comprehension are automatic word recognition, language comprehension, and strategic knowledge. The ultimate goal is reading comprehension. So we are thinking, what are the components that can affect really reading comprehension? Automatic word recognition, language comprehension, and strategic knowledge need to be supportive of one another in order to lead to reading comprehension. Now, when we look at language comprehension, that refers to vocabulary knowledge. And colleagues during our series will be explaining the value of vocabulary, as well as how to provide vocabulary instruction in a systematic way. But if someone doesn't know a word, it can be a challenge to understand it. And some colleagues, again, may share that it's easy to figure out words from context. However, context at times can be very vague. So it's very difficult to determine the meaning of a word based on context. Background knowledge is another component within language comprehension. If I don't know what the beach is, and I hear someone that they went to the beach and they played, I may not understand what that means. And finally, knowledge of text and sentence structures is important. The way that opinion papers and opinion ed papers and stories and problem solution papers and procedural essays are structured, all these have a completely different organization because they are different genres. They are different types of writing. So if someone has limited understanding of types of writing, when they will go read and they only bring a strong story structure, they will find challenging to read the text that's compare contrast, for instance, or cause effect, because it doesn't follow that flow and structure that they are accustomed to. The same challenge can be with sentence structures, where you may be able to understand a simple sentence, but when this will be a compound sentence, it can be more challenging to understand the meanings. Now, when we're looking at strategic knowledge, this relates to purposes of reading. So you may have a general purpose, but you also need to be able to identify the specific purposes for reading, and then apply strategies that will help you be a reader. So when we're thinking of strategies, and again, we have sessions on reading comprehension, we need perhaps to be looking into the students' application of specific strategies instead of teaching students a strategy to comprehend. So comprehension is challenging, it's coordination of complex skills. So and practices. So the question is, does the learner know strategies for reading? With upper grades, we conduct think aloud protocols, and there are colleagues like Sarah Beck who use think aloud protocols in their work to assess writing as well. But we use in assessment, and at the University of Tennessee in our literacy specialist program, we do engage students in learning how to do think aloud protocols to understand what is it that interferes in their usage of strategies when they're trying to make meaning, to construct meaning. So what are the specific purposes for this reading, and what are the general purposes for reading? Now, when you're looking at automatic word recognition, and this is the one that we will spend most time connecting it with what I shared so far, we are first examining fluency in context. So when you're looking at fluency, you're asking specific questions. So the first question is rate. What is the rate of the student? Do they read at an acceptable rate for their grade level expectations? Rate is how many correct words per minute can they read? How fast do they read, in other words? What's their prosody? And by prosody, it's, do they sound as when they speak? Does it sound naturally, or does it sound choppy the way that they decode? And accuracy, how accurate are they? How many words do they read? Do they substitute a lot of words? Do they change the words? And I want you to think as well, even though it's not measured I don't think that you'll see this measured, but there is a discussion on stamina, and Hebert has made comments on this stamina. And stamina, what I mean by stamina is, for how long can you retain this rate of reading? That you read that fast, but for how long can you retain that? Now, if someone doesn't have good rate, or we see that they are inaccurate, a lot of inaccuracies in what they read, we need to go one step back and ask now, what is it that interferes with their ability to read fluently? So how is their decoding? And when I see decoding, the question is, what are the decoding strategies they use? Do they sound out every word? Do they chunk? How do they decode words? Do they know the patterns? Do they know the CVC pattern, the vowel teams, the silent E, the R controls? Do they know these patterns? And then how do they spell? Do they know the letters? Because if I see that someone really cannot decode and confuses letters when they're trying to read words, we will follow with a letter names and sounds measure, because probably they don't know the letters well. And then here we'll also examine sight word knowledge, Because again, if you do not know how to read the word of, you will spend considerable amount of time trying to decode that word instead of devoting your cognitive energy to make meaning. Because again, the goal is to make meaning. Now, if someone struggles with decoding, really, we see that their spelling is extremely poor, that they cannot decode CVC words, they have very poor sight word knowledge, and even in the letter names and sounds they struggle, then we will ask, do they have adequate phonological awareness? And of course, a later question may be, what are their print concepts? Do they understand how to handle a book? Do they understand directionality, that we're moving from left to right, and then we're going again left to right, that we're moving top to bottom? That's the front of the book, there is the back of the book. Do they know these concepts of print? So when we are looking at phonological awareness, we will ask, because phonological awareness is an umbrella term that includes word awareness, rhyme awareness, onset rhyme. And when I say rhyme, I mean R-I-M-E, onset rhyme awareness, and phonemic awareness. We will examine whether they have these concepts, and then whether they have these print concepts. If we see that they still struggle with those, do they know how print works? What I'm trying to get you to be thinking is, reading is difficult and it's a challenge, and students will find these challenges. It's up to us to function in a way, as I share this with my students, you are diagnosticians in a way, but also you're like, you're trying to solve a mystery. What is it that interferes on my students' development, so that you can intervene effectively? This is an example of the Yop-Singer test of phonemic segmentation. There are some test items that the teacher will begin with the students, and then the teacher asks the students to break the words and segment. And then based on their responses, they will determine whether they are performing as expected or not, or whether they need additional practice on this. And the answer key, I have it because I provide it for our students when they are assessing, to make sure that they complete this correctly. So I have a sample case for you, because I think that it's best to apply so that we can better understand how this works. So here is the case of a student. This is the student's Maria. She's a first grade student. She completed the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, the next version, in the middle of the year. And her nonsense word fluency for sound, nonsense word fluency is the pseudo word assessment that exists in that measure. She scored 7 sounds and she was able to read 1 word. And for oral reading fluency, she read 9 correct words per minute with a 7% accuracy. She has not received any additional support. So the question is, shall we further test her? In order to answer this, we need to know, in this measure, what are the benchmarks? So here are the benchmark goals. In nonsense word fluency, the cut point for risk is 83, and the student scored 7. In nonsense word fluency, whole words read, the benchmark is 3, she read 1. And in oral reading fluency, the cut point for risk is 16, she read 9. And the cut point for risk for oral reading fluency accuracy is 68%, she scored a 7%. So yes, based on this, I should look at my cognitive model and I will say, yes, in fluency, the student did struggle. Obviously, this is an area of concern. So we need to follow with additional assessments, and the assessments will be in decoding, sight, word knowledge, and then follow with phonological awareness if need be, which probably will in this case. Now, she has a weak oral reading fluency, weak nonsense word fluency, so she will receive the phonics inventory, a decoding possibly inventory, the first 100 words from the Fry list, letter name, sound, phonological awareness for blending, segmenting, isolation, deletion, etc., primary spelling inventory, and writing. I will also like to share that in this case, I would really worry because in this instance, we have a student who is in the middle of the year and is performing that low, which makes me think that something happened and this student was not flagged much earlier in the fall semester. So this is what we don't want to see. We don't want to see students who are performing that low and they are in the middle of the year if they have been part of tier 1 and tier 2 systematic instruction, because tier 2 is for all. So moving away now, what is it that we should remember? We have the screening that's universal. Everyone is receiving it. It's like a thermometer. It will tell me if someone really performs as expected with grade level expectations. Then we will follow with identification of needs, and then we will provide instruction that will be progress monitored in specific intervals of time. So these can be 2-week intervals, 3-week intervals, but there has to be a specificity in the amount of time that this a progress monitor will take place. So what can go wrong in these assessment procedures that we use? You can overassess. You can do a lot of measures, a lot of assessments that they're not really needed. So going back into the cognitive model, if I see that the student is not performing well in fluency, and I will proceed with decoding measures. So I will do an informal decoding inventory, a spelling inventory. I may do a phonics inventory. And I see that all these are strong, that the student is, yes, he can decode, he or she, they can decode, they do have sufficient sight word knowledge. And this is not a concern. This means that I don't need to continue with letter names and sounds and additional measures, additional questions and assessments. I need to just focus on fluency and potentially pair up fluency and comprehension, because that child perhaps needs additional support in fluency, not necessarily support in decoding. Or maybe in the decoding area, I'll see that the struggle is with multisyllabic words. So I may pair up that fluency with multisyllabic decoding support without the need to do additional measures. So one thing that can go wrong is to overassess. And of course, to underassess, because you may think that, oh, this is enough and I don't need to do more, without looking at the pattern of responses of a student. Another area of challenge is that you may assess without analyzing the data. There are instances that when I personally work with teachers, that they will have folders of data that they just complete, but they are not necessarily analyzed, or they are completed because they are asked to complete them, but they have not looked at them to make instructional decisions. We try to eliminate loss of instructional time. The goal is to make sure that the students, we use instructional time wisely and we do not waste it. So we need to complete assessments because they will lead to instructional decisions, but we need to make sure that when we collect data, there is a purpose for this and the data are analyzed. You may also have inconsistent instruction. If you're working on a tier 2 and if you're working on tier 3, most of the time, or I would say all of the time, there is a protocol that needs to be followed. Sometimes also in tier 2, there is a specific protocol that needs to be followed with fidelity, not with integrity of delivery, but with fidelity. It may include immediate student feedback. It may include modeling. It has specificity in the type of delivery. So if this is not consistent, you may see that students don't grow at the same rate. So you may see that different classrooms or different groups grow at a different rate because the instruction is inconsistent. So when there is expectation of a program or of an instructional method to be delivered in a specific way, adaptations and change can lead to different results, because then you're not using it as expected and as it was designed for the job that it was designed to do. So inconsistent instruction can make things go wrong. And then you may have inconsistent progress monitoring, where there is a plan for students to be assessed every 2 weeks, and that doesn't happen. 1 week is 2 weeks, 1 week is 3 weeks, 1 week is, it doesn't happen, one time it doesn't happen. So we completed this review or this explanation of what assessment-based instruction and assessment-based decision-making is. What I want you to do very quickly is look back at your answer and see if you changed that answer and how you changed your answer. And I would like you, before you leave today, I want you to follow this link in order to share feedback with us. And I will put it in the chat because I would like to hear your feedback. This form will not take more than 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes actually to complete. In 2 minutes, you will be finished. But the goal is to give us feedback both on the session, but also on other topics that you would like to have. And again, before you leave, I need to invite you to our session 2 for next week. That's hosted by Drs. Jordan and Dr. Vines from our TPT, who are also both literacy experts, and they are in our literacy program, literacy specialist program, that is addressing educators' needs and comments on science of reading and shows the transition from decoding to encoding. So I will stop for some questions, and also I will share in the chat the link so you may complete the form. And here that is. Any questions? I'm sorry I went over my 1 hour. And I can stop the recording so that people can ask questions.